Okay. Hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Nupur Abrol. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at SACR, and I will be the moderator and co-host for the webinar today with Lawrence. And thank you so much for joining us today, especially on a Friday morning. We really appreciate you making the time to be here. We know that all our calendars are packed and security priorities are moving quickly. So we will make this hour very focused and valuable for each one of you present here. Before we dive in, let me quickly walk you through how we'll spend the rest of the 60 minutes here. So for the first 30 to 40 minutes, Lawrence will walk us through key insights from our recent and latest Unified Agentic Defense report. He'll break down why this category is emerging, what problems it aims to solve. Yes, you can see the slide on the agenda that he will walk you through, and what security leaders should be thinking about right now. And after that, we'll move into about 15 minutes of live question and answer session. Please drop your questions into the chat throughout the session. We will address as many as possible in the interest of time. And post that, we will also run a few quick polls during the webinar to understand where you are in your AI and agent security journey. So when you see those pop up, please, we encourage you to participate as well. And we'll close with final reflections and key takeaways before wrapping up the hour. So now, without further wait, it's my pleasure to introduce Lawrence Pingree. Lawrence brings over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity industry, and many of you here may know him from his time at Gartner, where he spent more than a decade analyzing emerging technologies and advising enterprise leaders in security strategy. He has seen firsthand how these technologies reshape the architecture. And with that, I would just thank you, Lawrence, for leading this research and for being here with us today. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nupur. It's great to be here today. I always say, there's only two other better days of the week, which are Saturday and Sunday, but I really appreciate everyone attending today. Today, we're going to talk about Agentics and the emergence of AI and the protection platforms that we see addressing the major shortcomings in traditional defenses. We're reaching kind of an inflection point in cybersecurity. We'll also go over kind of the market definition, what is an agent, and an overview of unified agentic defense platforms. We'll also talk through autonomous response and kind of the UADP feature categories, as well as the rankings that we came up with our survey, and we'll give you an overview of the survey. We'll also talk through the maneuvers that people are making. All right, so first and foremost, let's define what is an AI agent and what is Agentics. On the bottom of the slide, you can see that there's a goal that is given. Now, that's given via natural language to a reasoning engine. And in Agentics, the best way to describe this is when you're chatting with the model, you carve out a role, and that gives it the ability to develop a context window and a control loop for task execution. Now, the AI agent piece is essentially either the task execution, usually via an API or some other, remote software, or driving in external tools to reach a final outcome. So think of it as kind of like Agentics is the mind and the AI agent is the software that's driving. Okay, so we face brand new challenges in AI land, right? We have an expanding AI and agentic attack surface. This AI agent that we're driving can essentially do new things and be tampered in new ways. What that means is that traditional defenses are reaching this inflection point where, they're no longer good enough to protect these systems. We have increased agent decision logic or agency. We have, the need now to be able to, do runtime defense, workflow, and tool control and understand the behavior of these remote control agents. Security for AI and LLMs is becoming an absolute essential in defense. autonomous response capabilities are now a required feature, and we'll talk through all of these things. So let's start with looking at kind of the incidents that we've seen in AI land and agentics. So, for example, we've got 6 examples on the screen. You can't sue a chatbot, but you can sue its owner, right? So the organizations are now legally liable for their AI system errors. This means that like for example, in the case of an Air Canada, you might provide a incorrect fare ticket, information, and have to deliver a cheaper ticket to your customer. AI agents could be hacked by documents they read or emails, or maybe within the code repository, which means that the data itself that you feed the AI and the agent and that direct user input that might come in is a significant risk. Your employees may accidentally leak secrets, right? For example, I think most of us know of this concept of shadow AI. Now, not every employee is malicious, right? They're trying to accomplish their tasks. They're trying to be a good employee, but they're often adding documents, maybe sensitive in nature, to do some analysis, right? They might be using an AI tool to examine their code. Well, guess what? That's intellectual property, and that creates a significant insider risk, which clearly violates internal policy. We need a way to handle that situation. In another case, you had a Chevy Tahoe that was sold for $1 thanks to a chatbot glitch. I mean, well, I'd like to have a Chevy Tahoe because I like big trucks. But anyway, also you had a failure in, probably a very big cautionary tale, not to pick on Microsoft, but I mean, they are huge, right? But, Microsoft's Tay demonstrated that public-facing AI can cause major problems when your AI starts cussing to you, or maybe doing something going way off the rails and generating toxic content. There's been a lot of controversy about, things like CSAM and the creation of, pornography with AI and chat interfaces. That's, of course, controversial. And then you have things like sophisticated nation states. Like, for example, you have the Anthropic, agents being used to, and jailbroken actually in the process to do cyber espionage and, intrusion workflows. So, what are the 3 categories of big, risk on this screen? We've got things like agent, threats and input and interaction attacks. So what you can do is you could do things like direct prompt injection. I'm telling the AI through the chat interface, maybe using different commands to make it go off the guardrails, maybe generate, malicious content or harmful content, bypassing guardrails. You also, just like a human, I use the human analogy, even though a lot of people don't like using this, but if you think of AI models, they've been developed based on us, right? All of our comms, which means they assume our, social engineering problems. They assume, our challenges, but they don't have really good reasoning of what's good and what's bad. And so you can do things like role-playing attacks, for example, to bypass restrictions. And this is one of the most common things, right? Oh, well, I'm not really malicious. I'm doing a red teaming, exercise, right? Then universal adversarial triggers, input agnostic, information. I've seen even stories of AI being bypassed or guardrails being bypassed by creating their own language within, agentics. And so, there's just a huge host of different problems. You can hijack memory, for example, poisoning a long-term memory when, by using either malicious data inputs or, some other, means, maybe even compromising the systems that the AI is running on. You also have more complex attacks that can be executed across multiple prompts or reasoning steps. And then, of course, I love to drive my command line with AI. Occasionally it likes to go off the rails, right? So if we shift over to the middle column here, the agentic layer, you have excessive agency that is a significant problem. And, in the emergence of agentics, the large swath of permissions that are granted are over permissions, right? Which means like, oh, well, you can access all of my Google Drive and all of my, the things that the user can. Well, that agency that the agent has can go way off the rails. And I think we've seen some examples of that. For example, I think even OpenClaw, there was a major problem where the agents went off the rails and started to coordinate based on malicious data that was injected. You also have things like graph manipulation. As decision trees are being invoked. You might have the agent go off the rails, do things like looping. I've had that happen a number of times using my CLI, or even doing data analysis tasks where the agent just basically kind of over and over repeats itself, does the same thing over and over. I guess I tend to do that too. The older I get, I repeat myself. So, but you also have things like, data and RAG poisoning, knowledge-based poisoning attacks, where you have indirect exfiltration, reasoning leakage, or just training data poisoning. So all of these things are just a huge host of problems. Now there's even more problems, right? So shadow AI agents, there's this unauthorized long tail, right? So for example, you have, unmanaged SaaS that's used by an employee without oversight. We have the same exact problem with AI agents. We have this new shadow AI emerging where, if we don't have the right controls in place, we may not have visibility into what these agents or how they're being used, or even if they're being used. And then, of course, the agent could have a privilege escalation flaw, or it may even use agency to escalate its privilege. I heard of a case that an agent basically was given a goal, and when trying to execute that goal, it decided, well, you know what? I need to get this file. Let me just compromise the system next to me, grab the file, and then execute my goal. Now, it doesn't have a sense of, wrong or right. It just knows that it can do it, right? Identity masquerading is another problem, right? It might assume the identity. I heard of a case where an OpenClaw, or at least this is the story, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but the agent basically went off the rails and deep faked the guy's wife, and literally went out and registered with a deepfake API and a voice API to do so. We've had a number of other examples in that vein. Then there's also the infrastructure and supply chain risk. I think all of us have probably heard of the OpenClaw, plugins and other, artifacts that are used as modules to things like NPM and various other, back-end supply chains that have compromised the keys used, the secrets, and the supply chain and software itself. I think one of the latest examples is Client CLI, where Microsoft saw a spike in malicious, I think it was malicious libraries that were injected in the supply chain. And then, of course, we have denial of service, right? You can't forget that these things can also be overloaded. Oh, and by the way, all those other vulnerabilities that exist in software also are a significant problem. So on the right-hand side of this screen, we have the OWASP top 10 that we also need to pay attention to. And that's not even going into the OS and cloud risks, right? So let's jump over to a quick poll. Nupur?
Yes, Lauren. So we have already shared the poll while you were presenting, and
Oh,
we
you
have
did?
got the
Okay, great.
results, and I shared the results as well. Yeah, so
Excellent,
we have
excellent.
received the results as we asked everyone which specific AI agent threat poses the biggest risk, and 48% of them responded with excessive agency and prompt injection being the primary risks.
Absolutely. As the same with humans, right? Why do we give them policies and process, right? We want them to do what we want them to do, but not go off the rails, right? And so, things that are driving the market also are the regulatory mandates, the frameworks, the compliance that we all love so much. Things like the, U.S. executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI, the NIST RMF framework, resilience frameworks, DORA, and various other regulations that are driving the need for these kinds of tools. And so, of course, all of these tools have compliance enforcement or compliance reporting and governance. So let's look at the definitional elements, just to frame up what the Unified Agentic Defense Platform really looked at. This study really looked at the convergence between what we would consider traditional areas, right? Like the data security posture management, some emerging DLP and how that's transforming. Also, what some people call AI firewalls or AI gateways, the prompt filters, and then also things like the endpoint, the telemetry, the workload and identity aspects of these various dependencies on AI agents. And so if you look on the graphic, we have AI and workflow security that are important. We need that prompt shielding. We need to evaluate model risk. We need to look at things like the workflow and how it's executing, what tools it's using. We need runtime controls to be able to understand what's going on within the prompts and also within workloads and other cloud or APIs, right? We need the ability to be able to give these agents an identity, a non-human identity. And then, of course, data security is context for decision-making. So we need the understanding of data in use and data in motion and be able to have not only visibility and context, but the control and apply policy around the use and leakage or potential leakage of that data. Now, I also looked at things like integrations into global threat intel feeds. And I just realized that the other day on another webinar that, in fact, we can actually start to articulate things like AI agents and understand whether it's an AI interaction by simply kind of using deception techniques to make it go off the rails, and we can kind of detect that. So I'm hopeful that there will be some intelligence layer that will evolve from this. And then, of course, we need to understand the posture, the assessment of the entire workflow, and we need the ability to do autonomous remediation. So this is just the wide angle view, give you a little bit more context here. But UADP at its core is an autonomous agentic threat prevention and control system, right? The idea is to chart this new path forward where we can protect not only the AI interactions, but also the agents that they control, because we don't want them to go off the rails. We want to be able to create this space for execution, the benefits, without all the drawbacks. All right, so when we look at our Majestic Technoscope, what we've done is we've done a matrix ranking. So what we've done is evaluate the vendors based on what I call purpose and delivery. Delivery, the x-axis is assessing execution and efficacy, and then the y-axis evaluates purpose, assessing the vision and strategy. We're considering the innovation that they bring to market, the product efficiency, efficacy, and the compliance that they can bring to bear. Nupur, I think I had a spot here for another quick poll. I don't know if you read that.
Yes, of course. I'm going to launch the poll, everyone, on AI security. Please participate. We would like to know your responses here. I think, Lawrence, you can continue, and while we
Okay, all right.
have the participants answer.
Love the polling. Okay, so how did we go off and do this survey? So look, I've been buried in spreadsheets for the last 3 months, and Nupur and others can vouch for me. We surveyed 15 vendors. In fact, we sought after a lot more, but it's hard to get participation, of course. But we looked at things like the remediation and automation. Can they achieve this panacea of fully autonomous remediation of various risks? And, in the case of DSPM risk. Also, we looked at organizational commitment. Like, we're evaluating how good are these founders? Do they have a great background? Do they have strong organizational alignment? Do they have a vision of the future? Where where we want to go, right? What course we want to plot. We looked at quantifiable ROI, like, what is the OpEx reduction? How are they accelerating AI adoption and making it safer? The deployments and whether it's a smooth deployment, a friction, free deployment or not, and then whether or not they do, agentless or agents, offering the high speed value. And then we looked at their commercial model. How are they doing, transparent value-based pricing that, eliminates unpredictability, maybe usage-based costs. We looked at the supply chain security. Can they reach into things like the AI bomb or, the developer workspace with maybe plugins, looking at the supply chain of, the agents and the software that they're driving. We also looked at how well they integrate with things like, inline agentic workflows. Can they observe the behavior of agents? Can they understand the decision logic and the chain of thought reasoning that is going on between, workflow elements, and also perform real-time, runtime, what I call runtime prompt defense. And then also we looked at their breadth of ecosystem. How can they integrate with things like threat intelligence feeds and, various tools, various frameworks. And then we looked at their overall market footprint and, what we thought their growth rates were. So when we looked at this, I want to make sure that I address the elephant in the room of all analyst firms, right? Which is, are these people looking at it objectively? Well, absolutely. We contractualized analyst objectivity into this process. And I think if you spoke to any of my coworkers, they would understand I have a high regard for integrity and objectivity. We did vendor and customer interviews, objective third-party review and consideration. Well, the actual survey included a vendor self-assessment. I asked about 45 questions with distinct criteria and distinct sort of 1 to 5 scale answers. And then I asked for every vendor to justify that criteria. What are they delivering, right? They tell me what you're delivering and then justify the answer to your question. And then obviously I went through and then looked at each of these things, investigated, for 4 months, looking through documentation, reviewing, videos, looking at their websites, their technical specifications, and then arrived at my own score to each of these dimensions. And then that contributed to their overall plot on our graph. We also did vendor demonstrations of each of these things. And then, of course, at the end, we do try to make sure that we're factual, and we offered all the vendors fact review. Okay, so I don't want to go too much into depth here because you can look at this offline, but each of the X and Y plots, there's key dimensions that feed the actual plot. Things like the future roadmap. I'm an idealist, so I try to look at how are we going to arrive at that ideal location. So then we also looked at innovation. How fast are they delivering? We looked at their ecosystem, commercial model, organizational commitment, product efficacy, and then AI specifics, obviously. Can you do shadow AI discovery? Can you do the supply chain visibility or agentic workflows? And then we looked at things like, the value, time to value and the measurable ROI that's publicly, marketed. And then obviously, I think all of us on this phone call want to be able to do compliance. And then we looked at, how do you scale, right? So this is the output of the Majestic Technoscope. And, we have Palo Alto in one of the lead positions, SentinelOne a close second, Cyera, Veeam, and a cluster of others that were really competing in this, trailblazers area and innovation area. And then we also have, the pioneers like Noma and Lumia, a close following behind. And then, of course, there are emerging vendors that are coming in that are bringing new concepts to the market. And now, again, I'm looking at a very wide swath of capabilities, right? And I'm trying to set the compass for where we're going to go. None of these spots on this graph is anything bad. I just want to make sure you understand that. This is like taking a photo at maybe your family gathering and seeing a snapshot in time, right? None of these vendors are bad. They're all great. I actually think very much all of them are innovating in various ways. But I'm setting the destination, right? Where are we headed? We're headed towards this hopeful panacea of being able to deliver better protection, unified protection for agentics and in a platform concept. All right, so just some tidbits, Palo Alto delivers a runtime inspection capability. Obviously, they have a huge portfolio. They're known as a consolidator in the industry. Same with even, Microsoft and others. SentinelOne, same. You have Cyera positioned in a leading, AI native platform sort of spot. And they have really one of the strongest momentums in capital and feature velocity that we saw. SentinelOne leveraging its Purple AI and EDR tools to help bring to bear on agentic defense. They had high scores in execution and vision. You also have Veeam, which acquired security, which is a strong contender for unified, data command graph and their command center approach. You have Big ID that continues to leverage its deep, data discovery roots to expand into AI security and governance. Pillar offers a security solution focused on linking AI development posture to runtime defense and context-based threat intelligence. And then, of course, you have the pioneers and emerging players: Orca Security, Lasso, Orion, Mind, all in kind of early stages, but they're agile players addressing new AI runtime and shadow AI risks. You have Checkpoint with this acquisition of Cyera that integrates AI native LLM and agentic security into its existing Infinity platform. And if anybody knows about me, I'm a longtime Checkpoint fan. I wrote a couple books on the technology. And then, of course, we have, just a huge number of players that are all vying for new market entry into the AI space. You've got CrowdStrike, Zscaler, Netskope with their own offerings, and Varonis as well. So, very, very, lively market. The one would say that, I've heard this phrase used, that AI is like one of the biggest transformations next to the move from on-premise to cloud. And I would agree, right? There's a lot of activity in this space. And as we move into this autonomous era, the way that even users interact, I actually even feel like later we'll see and more embedded UI and less chat interfaces, and even this crazy thing like streaming UIs, right? So imagine you generate an app and then, everything streams to you. It's not even that far off. In fact, gaming, I'm a big gamer. Games are already working that way. So just some of the key trends that we saw in the space: big market shift from this, moving from a static to a probabilistic security, right? Where we require proactive, preemptive, and adaptive active defense, and to this real-time intervention. Now, I'm not going to stress this, I'm going to actually stress this more and more, because, look, I hear too often that the security technologies that are being deployed are not being turned on into enforcement mode. And I want to have a real quick chat about that, because I think it's one of the key things that, in my mind, we need to change as practitioners. We've got to get the CEO's permission to block them, right? We've got to. And we need to get to this mode where we're doing prevention first instead of detection and response. And I know a lot of you are going, well, we really like detection and response. We want to triage things. And yes, you should have humans involved when they're needed. But I think you need to make sure that you focus on moving to prevention. And I'll tell you quickly why. We are now living in a world where it is no longer a few weeks before somebody starts executing attacks with a new exploit. we're now living in a world that from the time of an exploit release, it's 5 minutes to 15 minutes to exploitation. Okay. Now that's if we know that there's a vulnerability, we discovered it. Now, AI is also proven to improve vulnerability discovery. Now, maybe not all deeper vulnerabilities, but vulnerability discovery by 500x what a human can do. All right, so some of the things that we've seen in key trends in the product roadmaps are things like agentic governance and authority, deep agent framework integration, the convergence of data and AI security. We have autonomous security operations and closed loop remediation. Also, the supply chain integration. So, a lot of providers are trying to add the visibility, into the developer environment, the IDE, as it were. And then also unified data planes and, things like graph engines where they can easily add lots and lots of great data and then do predictive and proactive exposure modeling and management. Then also, I'm a big fan of this, which is runtime. In fact, when I was at Gartner, I pushed runtime into the cloud, believing that if you think about it, APIs are built to save the network. They were not built to save the runtime. Okay, the runtime and older products like CSPM, not that they're bad, but they're just not good enough for doing prevention, right? And interceding. We need a good balance between detection and response and runtime enforcement. And then, of course, we are moving into this agentic future, which means we have autonomous AI workers. All right, so the future of the market is this real-time intent-aware enforcement. Now, I just published another article on what I call just-in-time trust. And the concept is this. When I looked across all of these different providers, what I saw pretty much all of them doing in some shape or form, when they had a runtime visibility, either proxy or API surface, and visibility into the prompt itself, what they're doing is they can use the natural language to derive intent. And what that means is if I'm asking a question, my intent is to gain knowledge, right? If I'm asking it to, breach my neighbor's, washing machine, that's a malicious intent. Well, what we can do with that intent is we can actually derive intelligence. We can apply policy based on that intent. And many of these products are moving in that direction or already using that technique to develop context around an interaction. And I believe that that can be shared in a way that the world can benefit. And especially when we start to federate A to A, we need to be able to convey this behavioral ranking and scoring of different agents. And then also we have the runtime expansion. Now, a lot of people, I probably could go on and on about runtime expansion for a long time, but in my mind, runtime means that I'm actually able to intercede, right? So whether it be a proxy, whether it be an API surface, whether it be a browser or an endpoint software, wherever I can intercede and make an actual prevention decision, that's runtime defense. So to me, if you're just querying an API and looking at and getting observability, that's not enough for the agentic future. You need also deep agent framework integration, right? These frameworks are kind of like the scaffolding for executing agent tasks, especially those where we're talking about embedded agents, whether it's behind the scenes or maybe on your desktop. So the agent frameworks also need to be highly visible, and obviously where there's integration and APIs, be integrated into the unified agentic defense platform concepts. All right. So, some examples of these integrations are, like the Amazon cloud integrations with their agent frameworks and the Amazon Bedrock, things like GitHub integration to understand what's going on within the development pipeline, Hugging Space, to understand all the models and the libraries there. The things like, maybe AWS Agent Core or, LangChain applications, support for Azure AI and AI Foundry, the Amazon Bedrock, even the RAG systems, right? You also need things like model scanning and visibility for Hugging Face. Some providers offer really good model cards, which tell you whether that model is off the rails. Is it able to do anything, or is it limited properly? Does it have the right, maybe, limited bias or ethics that we want these things to have? Okay, so you also have things like data stores and vector stores that are integrated with lake houses and data lakes. The Pinecone system for RAG. We already talked about the DevOps code repositories, but basically we see these systems expanding wherever we want to use Agentics, right? Even into communications channels, right? Where you wanted to summarize your conversation with a coworker or maybe your boss, take notes on a webinar. So we see this also expanding, obviously, in the security infrastructure realm. And we have SIM and SOAR products, obviously, for executing tasks across the enterprise. And in SIM land, I can see, again, intent adding to our repertoire of understanding the user and the agents that are in our environments. And then, of course, in identity providers for understanding, when an agent launches, what identity was it given? Give me traceability and auditing. Understand what that non-human agent did. And then also integration with things like the SASE architectures out there, which are delivering network and threat detection. And then also EDR tools, right? Or even runtime visibility tools in the cloud, where we can understand, hey, if this agent is running in let's say, a Docker container in the cloud or a Kubernetes container, what did it do? Can we record that activity? Can we use it to inform us as to whether that agent is going off the rails or it's executing some malicious task? Maybe we want to kill it, right? So this is just a quick taxonomy of various threats. We know that generative AI is susceptible to direct prompt injection, things like prompt injection, the uncontrolled actions, and they have a few different dimensions. Either tampering the data itself at training time, maybe in memory or at runtime, and then also white and black box and gray box sort of knowledge tampering. And then various goals. Sometimes people want to bring down the agent. Sometimes they want to misuse it or compromise privacy, right? I think just this last week, I think that Microsoft Copilot was called out as being able to exfiltrate data and have access to data that it shouldn't, right? Accidents happen. Vulnerabilities exist. It's sort of a fact of our lives. And obviously integrity violation. So, CISOs need to consider what we consider the 5 critical phases for unified agentic defense. One is, augment, securely source and prepare your data. Then develop an experiment, right? Secure the collaborative model. How are you building that model? Do version control. Make sure you're isolating all of that activity and focus on the prevention of data poisoning. And then on the deploy phase, things like, making sure that you use automated pipelines that are, recorded and auditable. You're using model artifacts and various tools that are already pre-validated before they go into production. And then at the operate phase, this is obviously my love, which is runtime, right? Not just continuous monitoring, not just giving visibility and observability, but actually defending and preventing, threats and tool misuse while they're executing. And then attestation, right? The ability to be able to go back and say, well, what did this agent do? What did this user do? And then, of course, the retirement phase, or maybe in the agent cycle, an actual reinstantiation of a good new agent, right? Being able to protect maybe that agent in confidential computing architecture, or leveraging memory, sharing, capabilities like multi-party computation and encryption, isolating the agentics so that essentially it can't be tampered with while it's executing. Okay, we got another quick poll. Nipur?
Yes, the poll is now live. I already see 14 votes. So
Excellent.
please,
Excellent.
everyone, please vote for this final poll of the webinar today.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So the final trends to watch before we get into Q&A. Look, unified agentic defense platforms are not perfect yet. A lot of the platforms are still in the process of gaining visibility into agents. Okay. Workflows are emerging still, right? The important thing is that we look at the entirety of agentics as a continuum, right? Just like we have in the past with the network, just like we have in the past with things like endpoint defense. This is a continuum, and we're going to need to move to this future of autonomous security operations. Now, I have a lot of people that worry about the future, how many people are going to be employed, all that stuff. You know what? Nobody's inspecting, operating systems, file by file, right? We've had antivirus doing automation for a long time. What these systems will do and will help is accelerate the human, right? We'll be able to do things hopefully cheaper, better, faster. We do see this clear convergence of data security and AI security because, agents are accessing data, right? They're doing things with data. And then we have this shift to this autonomous AI worker, which will carry out things that accelerate the humans, right? And then, of course, we need to have a good, solid governance and authority over the way that AI agents function. We need to focus on this notion of predictive and proactive exposure monitoring, modeling, and management. And I'm a big proponent of things like, preemptive cyber, right? Where we look ahead and we try to predict where things are going. And I think intent is a great prediction, right? Intent analytics, intent intelligence, intent policies, all of those things can help us defend from the user and the agent risks. And then obviously, we see this move to a unified data plane. And the unified data plane gives us observability across the entire landscape. It allows us to make better decisions and enforce those decisions within the entire architecture. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and I think we'll move to Q&A. So feel free to jump in and ask me questions.
We had a
I would like to if you don't mind, Nipur, can you share some of the results? Do you have screenshots or a way to show the results of the polls?
Yes, of course. So we will be sharing results. Look, I did share the polls, and I shared the results as soon as it was available. I am sharing the responsibility of AI security results, the third one right now. So please take your screenshots. But apart from that, we'll also be sharing these questions on our social channels. So we will be sharing the poll results there as part of our post. So please follow us on LinkedIn as Software Cyber Analyst Research page, so you can get hold of all the results there as well.
Awesome. Any questions? Any other questions you want to jump in? Which industry is? Oh, okay. I think that there's a lot of industries adopting UADP. Generally security spend orients to, like government, financial institutions, I tongue in cheek usually say, where the data is, right? Just like that's where the hackers go. They go to banks, they go to, so generally early adopters of technology tend to be, the government entities or, banks. I would probably say, banks leading the charge, followed by insurance carriers, insurance providers, retailers, because they tend to be, a destination of a lot of attacks. software providers, SaaS providers. So a lot of the companies where you see chat interfaces emerging, you see, like folks like Salesforce, those kinds of entities where they have, agentics being deployed, both, where the consumer of the UADP on the end user side and the providers themselves are adopting these technologies. Okay, it says, will we share the presentation? Yes, we will. And it's also going to be live on YouTube. All right. I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you all so much for this morning.